Imagine turning on every light in your house, cranking the heat to maximum, charging your electric car, and your electricity bill is half what your neighbor across the border pays. Not because you're cheating the system, not because you got lucky, but because 50 years ago, your country made one decision that changed everything. Welcome to France. While Germany spent $580 billion to make electricity more expensive and less reliable, France spent roughly the same amount to create the cleanest, cheapest, most reliable grid in the developed world. Same starting point, same resources, same technology available, two completely different outcomes. One country is shutting down factories because they can't afford to turn the lights on. The other is exporting so much cheap electricity to its neighbors that it's basically the OPEC of clean energy. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. France's electricity produces 1/6 the carbon emissions of Germany's grid while costing half as much. Today, I'm going to show you the greatest energy success story nobody talks about. We're going to follow the money, expose the propaganda that tried to bury this story, and reveal why France's boring solution is now being copied by every serious country on Earth. This isn't just about France. This is about what happens when physics beats politics, when math defeats ideology, when one country said screw the protesters and built the future everyone else wishes they had. Hit that subscribe button. This is going to challenge everything you think you know about green energy. What if I told you France's energy independence started with a national panic? Let's rewind to 1973. Disco is just starting, Watergate is unfolding, and the global economy is about to get absolutely demolished. October 1973, the Yom Kippur War breaks out in the Middle East. Arab oil producers declare an embargo. They turn off the tap. Oil prices don't just rise, they quadruple overnight. Gas lines stretch for miles, economies grind to a halt, panic in the streets. Europe gets crushed. Why? Because European countries imported almost all their oil from the Middle East. They had zero energy independence, zero leverage, zero options. French President Georges Pompidou and his Prime Minister Pierre Mesmer looked at this crisis and said something different than everyone else. They didn't say, let's beg OPEC to turn the oil back on. They didn't say, let's implement rationing and hope for the best. They said, never again. We will never be dependent on foreign energy again, whatever it takes. In March 1974, Prime Minister Mesmer announced the Mesmer Plan. The goal was audacious, almost insane. Build enough nuclear power plants to generate all of France's electricity. Not some, not most, all. The plan called for building 80 nuclear reactors in 25 years. That's more than 3 reactors per year every year for a quarter century. For context, the United States, with 5 times France's population and 15 times its GDP, was only planning to build about 100 reactors in the same time frame. France was going all in. But why nuclear? Why not coal? Why not natural gas? Why not wait for wind and solar? The logic was brutally simple. France has no oil. Can't control what you don't have. France has no natural gas. Same problem. France has no coal. Well, a little, but not enough. Wind and solar in 1974? Experimental at best, joke technology at worst. But France did have nuclear expertise from their weapons program, brilliant engineers from École Polytechnique, a national will to be independent, a government that could actually execute long-term plans. And uranium? You can stockpile years' worth of uranium in a single warehouse. 1 kilogram of uranium produces as much energy as 3 million kilograms of coal. You can't embargo uranium the way you can oil. You can't cut off a pipeline. France could buy from Canada, Australia, Kazakhstan, or Africa and store decades' worth of fuel. Now here's where it gets interesting. Germany in 1973 faced the exact same crisis. Same oil shock, same dependence, same vulnerability. Germany's response: build some nuclear, sure, but also invest heavily in coal. They had domestic coal, and later natural gas from Russia. This is the fork in the road, the moment where two similar countries made two completely different bets. France bet on energy independence through nuclear. Germany bet on energy diversity through imports. Fast forward 50 years. France, energy independent, cheap electricity, clean grid. Germany, dependent on imports, expensive electricity, dirty grid. But building 80 nuclear reactors isn't just about having a plan, it's about execution. And France's execution was nothing short of an engineering miracle that nobody talks about. In Section 2, we're going to dive into how they actually pulled this off, because the how is what separates a fantasy PowerPoint presentation from the real-world energy dominance. What if I told you France built nuclear reactors faster than most countries can build parking garages? Here's a stat that should blow your mind. Between 1977 and 1992, France connected 54 nuclear reactors to the grid. That's 15 years. That's 3.6 reactors per year on average. For comparison, the United States has connected 0 new nuclear reactors in the last 7 years. The UK's Hinkley Point C has been under construction since 2016 and still isn't finished. France built their entire nuclear fleet for approximately $330 billion in today's dollars, adjusted for inflation. Germany spent $580 billion on renewables and got a grid that's dirtier and more expensive. So how did France pull off this engineering miracle? Secret number 1: standardization. France didn't build 56 different reactor designs. They built the same reactor over and over and over. They chose one design, the pressurized water reactor, PWR. They licensed the technology from Westinghouse, Frenchified it, and called it done. Think of it like Henry Ford's assembly line. You don't reinvent the car for every customer. You perfect one design and replicate it.
This created a learning curve effect. Reactor number 1, expensive, slow, lots of mistakes. Reactor number 10, cheaper, faster, fewer mistakes. Reactor number 30, even cheaper, even faster, barely any mistakes. Reactor number 50, you could build these things in your sleep. The cost per reactor actually decreased as they built more, the opposite of what happens in most countries where every reactor is a unique snowflake with unique problems. Secret number 2, consistent workforce. France trained an army of nuclear engineers, welders, concrete specialists, and project managers. These teams moved from project to project, taking their expertise with them. In the US and UK, projects have decades-long gaps between builds. The workforce retires or moves to other industries. You have to retrain from scratch every time. In France, continuous construction for 20-plus years meant the workforce got better over time. Secret number 3, centralized control. France created 2 main entities: EDF, Électricité de France, state-owned utility that would operate the plants, and Framatome, a French company that would build the reactors. No competing utilities with different standards, no state-by-state regulations, no endless jurisdictional battles. One government, one plan, one set of regulations, execute. Compare this to the United States, where you had 50 different state regulations, dozens of different utilities, multiple reactor designs, constantly changing federal regulations, anti-nuclear protests causing endless delays. And then 3 Mile Island happened in 1979, a partial meltdown in Pennsylvania. No deaths, no injuries, but massive public panic. U.S. nuclear construction basically stopped overnight. Orders were canceled, projects abandoned. The nuclear industry was strangled in its crib.
France's reaction to 3 Mile Island? That's unfortunate. Anyway, here's reactor number 25. They studied the incident. They implemented the safety lessons. They kept building. Why? Because French public opinion was different. Secret number 4. Public support, or at least public acceptance. The French government ran a massive public information campaign. Nuclear equals energy independence. Nuclear equals no more oil shocks. Nuclear equals French jobs. Nuclear equals cheap electricity. Nuclear equals sticking it to OPEC. They tied it to national pride, to French sovereignty, to beating the Anglo-Saxons at their own technological game. Were there protests? Of course. The anti-nuclear movement existed in France too. But the French government said, "We hear you. We're building them anyway. If you don't like it, vote us out." And you know what? French voters kept re-electing governments that built nuclear plants because cheap electricity is popular. Energy independence is popular. By the mid-1990s, France had 56 nuclear reactors operational, generating 75% of all electricity. Cheapest electricity in Western Europe. Carbon emissions from electricity near zero. Energy independence achieved. And the economic impact was enormous. EDF became one of the world's largest utilities. French nuclear industry employed 220,000 plus people. France became a net exporter of electricity. French industry had a massive competitive advantage, cheap power. Today, France exports electricity to Germany, yes, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, Switzerland, Belgium. The ultimate irony? France makes billions per year selling nuclear-generated electricity to countries that claim to oppose nuclear power. Germany shuts down its nuclear plants, then buys French nuclear electricity. It's like being a vegan who pays your neighbor to eat your steak for you. But it's not just about building reactors. It's about what those reactors enabled. In Section 3, we're going to explore how cheap nuclear power transformed France into an industrial powerhouse and gave them a weapon that's reshaping European politics. What if your entire economy ran on electricity that cost half as much as your competitors? Let's talk about something economists call input costs. Boring term, massive implications. If you're making steel, chemicals, aluminum, or glass, electricity is one of your biggest expenses, sometimes 30 to 40% of your production cost. French industrial electricity 0.10 to 0.12 euros per kilowatt hour. German industrial electricity 0.25 to 0.32 euros per kilowatt hour. That means a French factory can produce the same product for 40 to 50% less energy cost than a German competitor. That's not a small advantage. That's a massive, sustained, structural competitive advantage. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Aluminum smelting. Aluminum is one of the most energy-intensive products on Earth. It takes about 15,000 kilowatt-hours to produce 1 ton of aluminum. In France, at 0.10 euros per kilowatt-hour, 1,500 euros per ton. In Germany, at 0.25 euros per kilowatt-hour, 3,750 euros per ton. Same aluminum, same quality. The German version costs 2,250 euros more just in electricity. France has massive aluminum smelters that would be completely uneconomical in Germany. These facilities employ thousands of people in high-paying jobs that simply couldn't exist without cheap power. Chemical production. Remember BASF in Germany shutting down and moving to China? Meanwhile, French chemical companies are expanding. Companies like Air Liquide Arkema and Solvay operate massive facilities in France, producing industrial gases, plastics and polymers, specialty chemicals, pharmaceuticals. They can undercut competitors on price while maintaining margins. They can invest in R&D. They can pay good wages, all because their electricity bill is manageable. Electric arc furnaces use enormous amounts of electricity. France's steel industry hasn't disappeared like in other parts of Europe. ArcelorMittal operates major facilities in France specifically because energy costs make it viable. Data centers. Here's where it gets really interesting for the 21st century. AI, cloud computing, cryptocurrency when it was booming, streaming services. These all require massive data centers that consume incredible amounts of power. Guess where companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are building data centers? France. Why? Cheap, clean, reliable electricity that won't randomly shut off when the wind stops blowing. And they can legitimately claim their cloud services are green because French electricity is 90% nuclear and hydro. But here's where it becomes a geopolitical weapon. France is connected to the European electricity grid. When other countries are short on power, France sells them electricity at whatever price the market will bear. Winter 2022 to 2023, the energy crisis after Russia cut off gas. Spot prices for electricity in Germany hit 500 to 800 euros per megawatt hour. France's production cost? About 50 to 70 euros per megawatt hour. France was selling electricity for 10x their production cost. EDF and French generators made billions. And who was buying? Germany, Italy, Spain, UK. All the countries that decided nuclear was too scary. This gives France enormous political leverage in the EU. Want to sanction our agricultural policies? That's fine, enjoy your blackouts. They've never said it that explicitly, but the implication is always there. When Macron walks into EU negotiations, he's negotiating from a position of strength. France has what everyone else needs. But it's not just about industry. Cheap electricity affects everything. Households? Lower bills mean more disposable income. Small businesses can afford to operate. Agriculture? Cheap power for irrigation, refrigeration, processing. Transportation? Electrification becomes economically viable. France's high-speed rail network, the TGV, runs on electricity. Cheap electricity makes rail competitive with cars and planes. 70% of French homes use electric heating. In most countries, this would be insanely expensive. In France, it's the cheapest option. This creates a compounding economic advantage. Cheap power, competitive industry, more jobs, higher tax revenue, more investment, even stronger economy. Meanwhile, Germany is in a death spiral. Expensive power, uncompetitive industry, job losses, lower tax revenue, less investment, weaker economy, even more expensive power. And here's the kicker for the future. The world is electrifying everything. Electric cars, electric heating, electric industrial processes, electric hydrogen production. The more electrified the economy becomes, the bigger France's advantage grows. They future-proofed their economy 50 years ago. But surely it's not all sunshine and cheap electricity, right? What about the nuclear waste? What about the safety concerns? What about Chernobyl and Fukushima? In Section 4, we're going to tackle the propaganda head-on, because the anti-nuclear movement has been lying to you for decades, and I'm going to prove it with math. What if everything you think you know about nuclear power is wrong? Let's address the elephant in the room. When I mentioned nuclear power, half of you just felt a little uncomfortable, maybe a little scared. You're thinking, what about Chernobyl? What about Fukushima? What about the nuclear waste? What if there's an accident? Isn't radiation dangerous? These fears didn't appear out of nowhere. They were manufactured by a decades-long propaganda campaign that mixed legitimate concerns with outright lies. Let me show you the truth. Myth number 1. Nuclear power is dangerous. Let's look at actual death tolls per unit of energy produced. Deaths per terawatt-hour of electricity. Coal, 24.6 deaths. Oil, 18.4 deaths. Biomass, 4.6 deaths. Natural gas, 2.8 deaths. Hydro, 1.3 deaths, mostly from dam failures. Wind, 0.04 deaths. Solar, 0.02 deaths. Nuclear, 0.01 deaths. Nuclear is the safest form of energy production ever invented, including wind and solar. But what about Chernobyl? Chernobyl killed approximately 50 people directly and potentially thousands more from long-term radiation exposure. Estimates vary wildly. It was horrific. It was a tragedy. It should never have happened. But Chernobyl was a Soviet-era reactor with no containment building, operated recklessly during a safety test, using a design that would never be approved in the West, under a secretive regime that delayed evacuation. Modern nuclear plants have multiple redundant safety systems, containment buildings that can withstand airplane impacts, passive safety features that work even without power, and rigorous international oversight. Comparing Chernobyl to a French nuclear plant is like comparing a Soviet Lada with no seatbelts to a modern Volvo with 47 airbags. But what about Fukushima? Fukushima was hit by a 9.0 magnitude earthquake followed by a massive tsunami, the fourth largest earthquake ever recorded. Deaths from radiation at Fukushima? 0. That's right, 0. Not one single person died from radiation exposure. The disaster killed approximately 18,500 people from the earthquake and tsunami, 0 from the nuclear plant. In fact, more people died from the panicked evacuation of the surrounding area than would have died if they'd just stayed home. Myth number 2. Radiation is uniquely dangerous. Let's talk about radiation, because this is where the propaganda really worked. Radiation is measured in millisieverts. Here are some comparisons. Eating a banana, 0.0001 millisieverts. Bananas contain radioactive potassium. Chest X-ray, 0.1 millisieverts. Flight from New York to Paris, 0.05 millisieverts. Cosmic radiation. Living in Denver for a year, 0.7 millisieverts extra. High altitude equals more cosmic radiation. Annual background radiation, average, 2.4 millisieverts. CT scan, 10 millisieverts. Living next to a nuclear power plant for a year, 0.0001 millisieverts. You get more radiation from eating bananas than living next to a nuclear power plant. You get more radiation from one medical CT scan than a nuclear plant worker receives in a year. And here's the kicker. Coal plants release more radiation into the environment than nuclear plants because coal ash contains traces of uranium and thorium. Living next to a coal plant exposes you to more radiation than living next to a nuclear plant. Myth number 3. Nuclear waste is an unsolvable problem. This is the big one. Everyone knows nuclear waste is a disaster waiting to happen. Here's what they don't tell you. All the nuclear waste France has produced in 50 years, enough electricity to power the entire country for half a century, fits in one facility. It's at La Hague in Normandy. The entire volume of high-level waste would fit in an Olympic swimming pool. Coal plants produce 100+ million tons of toxic ash per year. Where does it go? Into unlined pits, rivers, and the atmosphere. Solar panels contain toxic heavy metals. When they're disposed of after 20 to 25 years, where do they go? Mostly landfills in developing countries. Nuclear waste is solid. You can pick it up and hold it. Contained in sealed casks, monitored 24/7, decreasing in radioactivity over time. After 1,000 years, nuclear waste is less radioactive than natural uranium ore. And the long-term solution? Deep geological repositories. Bury it 500 meters underground in stable rock formations. It's not rocket science. Finland is building one right now, the Onkalo repository. Sweden and France are following. But here's what's even better. France reprocesses its nuclear fuel. They take spent fuel rods and extract the remaining usable material. This means 96% of waste gets recycled. Only 4% is actual long-term waste. Reduces waste volume by 25x. Reduces long-term radioactivity by 10x. The US doesn't reprocess because Jimmy Carter banned it in the 1970s over proliferation fears. So, American nuclear waste just sits at reactor sites. France turned waste into a resource. Myth number 4. The anti-nuclear movement is about safety. Let's be honest about what the anti-nuclear movement actually is. It started in the 1970s mixed with legitimate safety concerns, Cold War fears about nuclear weapons, environmentalism, anti-establishment counterculture, and fossil fuel industry funding. Wait, what? Yes, fossil fuel companies funded anti-nuclear groups because nuclear was their main competitor. If nuclear succeeds, coal and gas lose. So they funded grassroots opposition groups. Now, not everyone was paid off. Many anti-nuclear activists genuinely believe they're saving the planet, but they've been useful idiots for the fossil fuel industry. Germany shut down nuclear plants, burned more coal and gas. Fossil fuel companies profited enormously. Followed the money. France ignored the propaganda. They looked at the math. Deaths per TWH? Nuclear wins. Carbon emissions? Nuclear wins. Land use? Nuclear wins. Uses 100x less land than solar and wind. Resource consumption? Nuclear wins. Reliability? Nuclear wins. Cost? Nuclear wins. But France didn't just win the technical argument. They won the political argument. And in Section 5, we're going to see how France's nuclear dominance is reshaping the entire European energy landscape right now. What if one country controlled the power switch for an entire continent? Winter 2022. The Russia-Ukraine war is raging. Russian gas has been cut off. Europe is in an energy crisis. Headlines screaming, Europe faces energy rationing. Blackouts possible this winter. Factories shutting down. And then you look at the European electricity grid. All the interconnections, all the power flows, and there's France, sitting in the middle, with 56 nuclear reactors humming away 24/7, reliable, unstoppable. France became the energy lifeline of Europe. Let me show you the numbers. In 2022, France exported 50+ terawatt-hours of electricity to neighboring countries. To put that in perspective, that's enough to power Belgium for an entire year. Who was buying? Germany, the country that shut down its nuclear plants, now desperately buying French nuclear power. Italy closed all their nuclear plants after Chernobyl, now importing from France. UK, struggling with gas prices, importing via undersea cables. Spain, peak demand periods requiring French backup. Switzerland, already 60% hydro, but needs more during dry periods. And France wasn't giving this away out of charity. Electricity spot prices during peak crisis moments, 500 to 800 euros per megawatt hour in Germany and Italy. France's production cost, nearly 60 euros per megawatt hour. EDF, Électricité de France, made absolutely obscene profits during this period. We're talking billions in pure profit from exports. And this gives France enormous political power. Every EU decision now has an energy dimension. Scenario 1. Agricultural subsidies. Other EU countries want to reduce France's Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, subsidies. France's implicit response? Sure, let's talk about that. By the way, how's your energy security looking this winter? End of discussion. France keeps its subsidies. Scenario 2. Climate policy. The EU wants aggressive carbon reduction targets. Some countries tried to exclude nuclear from the green taxonomy, the list of sustainable investments. France threatened to veto the entire package. Result? Nuclear was included. France won. President Emmanuel Macron walks into EU summits knowing he has leverage that Germany, Italy, and Spain don't have. Macron in 2022, those who made different choices on nuclear 20 to 30 years ago today find themselves dependent on imports and exposed to energy price volatility. Translation: we told you so. Now you need us. Remember that. The UK connection. Brexit happens, UK leaves EU. Lots of anger and tension. But UK-France electricity interconnectors keep running. Why? Because when the wind doesn't blow in the UK, which is often, they need French nuclear power. France sells gigawatts to the UK during peak demand. The UK needs this relationship. This gives France leverage in post-Brexit negotiations that has nothing to do with trade rights or fishing rights. The pattern of dependence. France has created a web of energy dependence across Europe. Physical infrastructure, interconnectors that takes decades to build. Technical expertise that can't be quickly replicated. Financial stakes, long-term contracts that lock in relationships. Political necessity. Keep the lights on. It's almost like, wait for it, it's almost like what Russia tried to do with gas pipelines. Except France is a democracy, an EU member, not invading neighbors, and actually reliable. France has a clean energy monopoly in Europe. They did it legally, transparently, and with technology that works. Germany bet on Russian gas and renewables. France bet on nuclear independence. 50 years later, Germany is importing French electrons while their factories close. France is exporting power and political leverage. The future? Nuclear renaissance. 2021, Macron announced France 2030 plan. Build 6 new large nuclear reactors, EPR2 design. Develop small modular nuclear reactors, SMRs. Extend lifetime of existing plants to 60+ years. Invest 30 billion euros in nuclear technology. Why? Because France saw what happened during the 2022 crisis and said, we need more of this. And now who's following? Poland, building its first nuclear plants. Czech Republic, expanding nuclear. Netherlands, reversing nuclear phase-out. UK, building new plants very slowly. Even Belgium is reconsidering its nuclear phase-out. Even Germany is having quiet discussions about whether shutting down was a mistake. The dominoes are falling. France's model is being validated in real time. But nuclear isn't perfect. France has faced challenges, and in Section 6, we need to talk honestly about the problems, because ignoring them would make me as dishonest as the anti-nuclear propagandists. What if I told you France's nuclear program nearly collapsed in 2022? Okay, let's be honest. I've spent 30 minutes singing the praises of French nuclear power, but France isn't perfect. They've made mistakes, and they're facing real challenges. Summer 2022, the energy crisis. You'd think France would be fine, right? Instead, half of France's nuclear fleet was offline. Wait, what? Challenge number 1, the maintenance crisis. In late 2021, inspectors discovered stress corrosion cracking in pipes at the Civaux nuclear plant. Not a huge deal by itself, but concerning. Then they found similar issues at other plants. Then more. At the peak, 28 out of 56 reactors were offline for maintenance and inspections. This happened at the worst possible time, right when Europe needed French electricity most. Ironically, France had to import electricity from Germany during this period, from German coal and gas plants. The Schadenfreude from German politicians was palpable. What went wrong? EDF had been under financial pressure for years. The French government forced them to sell electricity below cost to support French consumers and industry. Result: delayed maintenance, deferred upgrades, stretched budgets. The lesson: even the best technology needs proper maintenance and investment. You can't starve your nuclear fleet and expect it to run flawlessly for 50 years. The good news is, by early 2023, most reactors were back online. The problems were fixable. France learned the lesson. Challenge number 2: the EPR disaster. France decided to build a new generation reactor, the European Pressurized Reactor, EPR, the newest, safest, most advanced design. Flamanville 3 EPR. Construction started 2007. Original completion date 2012. Original budget Euro 3.3 billion. Actual completion 2024, maybe. Actual cost Euro 19+ billion. This is an absolute disaster. 12+ years late, 6 times over budget. What went wrong? Loss of expertise? 15 years since last reactor meant skilled workforce retired. Complex new design. EPR is incredibly sophisticated but untested. Regulatory changes mid-construction. Quality control failures. Welds had to be redone, concrete poured incorrectly. Project management chaos. No one had experience managing this kind of project anymore. Remember when France was building 3-4 reactors per year? They lost that capability through inaction. And it's not just Flamanville. Olkiluoto, Finland, 13 years late. Hinkley Point C, UK, already delayed and over budget. The lesson? You can't take a 15-year break from building nuclear plants and expect to pick up where you left off. Skills atrophy. Expertise disappears. The hope. Flamanville is finally about to come online, and now that they've learned from these mistakes, the next ones, EPR2 design, should be better. Challenge number 3: political challenges. France isn't immune to anti-nuclear sentiment. The Green Party, Europe Écologie Les Verts, opposes nuclear power. Public opinion has shifted over time. 1970s and 80s, strong support. 1990s, 2000s, declining support after Chernobyl. 2010s, mixed opinions. 2020s, renewed support after energy crisis. There's an age divide. Older French, remember the oil crisis, support nuclear. Younger French, more influenced by the environmental movement, more skeptical. Macron is betting that energy security and climate change will keep public opinion favorable, but it's not guaranteed. Challenge number 4: waste disposal. Yes, it's still debated. France is building CIGEO, a deep geological repository for high-level waste in eastern France. Local opposition is fierce. Nobody wants it in their backyard, even though the science says it's safe. Originally supposed to open in 2025, now pushed to 2035 plus. Meanwhile, waste is safely stored at La Hague. It's not a crisis, but it's politically difficult. Challenge number 5: new competition. Solar and wind costs have fallen dramatically. In some cases, they're now cheaper than nuclear on a pure LCOE basis. But, and this is critical, that comparison ignores intermittency costs, grid stabilization costs, backup power requirements, land use requirements. When you account for total system costs, grid, backup, and storage, nuclear is still competitive or cheaper. But the political narrative is renewables are cheaper, and that's hard to fight. Challenge number 6: aging fleet. Most French reactors were built in the 1980s. Now they're 35 to 40 years old. Original design life, 40 years. France is extending their operational life to 60 years, possibly 80 years with major refurbishments. But this requires major investments, $50 billion total, regulatory approval, and public acceptance. The alternative is building new reactors to replace them, which brings us back to the EPR problems. So, yes, France faces real challenges: maintenance backlog, new build difficulties, political opposition, waste disposal debates, and aging infrastructure. But here's the key difference between France and Germany. France's challenges are solvable. Maintenance, spend money, fix it. Check. New builds, learn from mistakes, standardize. Check. Politics, public opinion is shifting favorable. Check. Waste, technical solution exists. Check. Aging fleet, extension plus new builds. Check. Germany's challenges are structural. No baseload power, check. Dependent on imports, check. Expensive electricity, check. Industrial exodus, check. Can't fix without admitting massive mistake, check. France stumbled but is correcting course. Germany jumped off a cliff and is still falling. And in our final section, let's talk about what this means for the future, because the nuclear renaissance is just beginning, and France is leading it. What if I told you nuclear power is about to have its iPhone moment? Something remarkable is happening right now. After decades of being declared dead, nuclear power is having a massive comeback. And France, they're about to cash in. Again. The numbers don't lie. Currently under construction worldwide: China, 23 reactors; India, 8 reactors; Russia, 4 reactors; South Korea, 4 reactors; Turkey, 4 reactors; UAE recently completed 4 reactors. In planning stages, over 110 reactors worldwide, combined capacity of 125 plus gigawatts. This isn't hippies building experimental reactors. This is national governments, major utilities, tech companies, industrial giants. Why now? 3 reasons. Reason number 1, climate change reality. The world finally accepted that climate change is real and we need to decarbonize fast. Wind and solar can't do it alone. Germany proved that. You need baseload power. Your options? Coal? No, that's what we're trying to eliminate. Gas? Better than coal, but still fossil fuels. Hydro? Already built everywhere possible. Nuclear? Bingo. Even the UN IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, now says nuclear is essential for meeting climate goals. The same environmentalists who opposed nuclear for 50 years are slowly, grudgingly admitting they were wrong. Reason number 2, energy security. Russia-Ukraine war exposed Europe's vulnerability. Everyone learned the hard way. Energy dependence equals national security threat. Nuclear equals independence. Fuel can be stockpiled for years, multiple suppliers worldwide. Can't be cut off by pipeline politics. Don't need gas from authoritarian regimes. Poland, which spent decades burning coal, is now building nuclear specifically to get off Russian gas. Reason number 3, the AI boom. AI requires massive amounts of computing power. Data centers are eating electricity like never before. Projections suggest AI could require 20% of all U.S. electricity by 2030. Tech companies are freaking out about power availability. Microsoft partnering with Constellation Energy to restart 3 Mile Island reactor. Google investing in small modular reactor companies. Amazon buying nuclear-powered data centers. Meta exploring nuclear options. Sam Altman, AI CEO, says AI will require breakthrough energy solutions. Nuclear is the only scalable option. The irony is delicious. Silicon Valley tech bros, traditionally liberal, environmentalist, anti-nuclear, are now the biggest cheerleaders for nuclear power because they actually did the math. France's opportunity. EDF is now positioned as the world's nuclear expert. They have 50-plus years of operational experience, proven track record, trained workforce, technology portfolio. EDF is bidding on projects in Poland, 4 to 6 reactors, Czech Republic, expansion, India, partnership discussions, Saudi Arabia, nuclear program, UK, Hinkley Point C, already building, Sizewell C, planned. We're talking about hundreds of billions in potential revenue over the next 30 years. Framatome, a nuclear reactor builder, is also positioned to supply reactor components, fuel assemblies, maintenance services, safety upgrades. France has an entire nuclear industrial ecosystem that most countries don't have. Engineering firms, component manufacturers, fuel cycle facilities, regulatory expertise, training centers. The SMR revolution. Small modular reactors are the future. Factory-built, not custom on-site construction. Much smaller, 50 to 300 megawatts versus 1,000 plus. Faster to build, 3 to 5 years versus 10 plus. More flexible deployment, inherently safer designs. France is developing Neward, their SMR design. Target operational by 2030-2035. SMRs are perfect for remote communities, industrial facilities, chemical plants, data centers. Replacing old coal plants use existing grid connections. Developing countries don't need massive grid capacity. The SMR market could be worth $100 billion by 2040. France is positioned to capture a huge chunk of that. Generation 4 reactors. France is also investing in Generation 4 reactors, molten salt reactors, sodium-cooled fast reactors, high-temperature gas reactors. These designs promise even better safety, ability to burn existing nuclear waste as fuel, higher efficiency, lower costs. Timeline 2030-2040 for commercialization. France is betting big that these technologies will be the next wave, just like they bet big on PWRs in the 1970s. The regulatory revolution. France is heavily involved in International Atomic Energy Agency, nuclear safety standards, global regulatory frameworks. If French designs become the global standard, France wins for decades. It's like how U.S. tech standards, internet protocols, etc., gave American companies huge advantages. Every country that builds French reactors needs French fuel, needs French maintenance, needs French expertise, becomes locked into French ecosystem. And nuclear reactors last 50 to 80 years. That's 50 to 80 years of business relationships. Germany spent $580 billion to become dependent on everyone else. France spent $330 billion to make everyone else dependent on them. So what's the lesson here? What should the rest of us learn from France's 50-year bet that's now paying off beyond anyone's imagination? Let's wrap this up. What if the future belongs to whoever can ignore the mob? Let's zoom out for a second. Two countries, same starting point in the 1970s, same resources, same technological capability. 50 years later, France, energy independent, cheapest electricity in Western Europe, cleanest grid in Europe, industrial base thriving, exporting power and expertise, political leverage over neighbors. Germany, energy dependent, most expensive electricity in Europe, one of the dirtiest grids in Western Europe, industrial base collapsing, importing power, political leverage, zero. What made the difference? Lesson number 1. Long-term thinking beats short-term politics. France made a 50-year bet in the 1970s. They stuck with it through changes in government, public protests, international criticism, technological setbacks. Germany flip-flopped based on whatever the current political mood was. Pro-nuclear under Kohl, anti-nuclear after Chernobyl, pro-nuclear under Merkel, anti-nuclear after Fukushima. Energy policy cannot be based on the latest crisis or protest movement. It requires vision that spans generations. Lesson number 2, physics beats feelings. France asked, what actually works? They looked at energy density, reliability, scalability, cost, carbon emissions, safety, actual data, not fears, and they chose nuclear. Germany asked, what feels right? And they chose based on public opinion polls, protest movements, emotional reactions to rare events, and wishful thinking about renewables. Physics won. Physics always wins. Lesson number 3, political courage matters. French leaders had the courage to say, we hear your concerns, we understand your fears, but we're doing this anyway because it's right for the country. German leaders asked, what do the polls say? What will help me win the next election? 50 years later, French leaders look like visionaries. German leaders look like cowards who destroyed their country's economic foundation. Lesson number 4, listen to engineers, not activists. France listened to their nuclear engineers, physicists, and economists. Germany listened to Greenpeace, celebrity activists, and people whose only qualification was being very, very angry. Who would you trust to design an energy system? A PhD in nuclear engineering with 30 years of experience, or an 18-year-old who skipped school to protest?
Germany chose the 18-year-old. Lesson number 5. Energy independence is national security. France understood that energy security is as important as military security. They invested in both nuclear weapons and nuclear power, two sides of the same coin, national sovereignty. Germany outsourced their energy security to Russian dictators, Middle Eastern monarchies, weather patterns, and the kindness of neighbors. France can't be blackmailed. Germany can be. What this means for the world. Every developing country right now is making energy decisions. India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Nigeria, Brazil, Pakistan. They can follow the German path, expensive, unreliable, dependent on imports, economic suicide. Or the French path, affordable, reliable, independent, economic growth. Guess which path they're choosing? They're choosing nuclear, massively. Because poor countries can't afford German-style virtue signaling, they need electricity that works and doesn't cost a fortune. And this is actually good for climate. If the developing world follows France's nuclear path instead of Germany's renewable plus coal path, billions of tons less CO2, actual decarbonization, sustainable development. The anti-nuclear environmentalists who thought they were saving the planet, they may have doomed us to decades more fossil fuel dependence. France, the country they criticized, may actually save the planet. My final thought. I started researching this topic expecting to find a mixed bag, some pros, some cons, maybe it's complicated. But the more I dug, the clearer it became. France was right. Germany was catastrophically wrong. This isn't just about electricity, it's about economic prosperity, national security, climate change, the future of industrial civilization. And right now, your country is making energy decisions that will shape the next 50 years. Pay attention, ask questions, demand answers based on math and physics, not feelings and propaganda. Don't let your country make Germany's mistake. Today, we covered how France bet everything on nuclear after the 1973 oil crisis, how they built 56 reactors in 15 years through standardization and political will, how cheap nuclear power created an economic superweapon, how France dominates European energy politics today, the challenges they face and how they're fixing them, the global nuclear renaissance that's vindicating their 50-year bet. The bottom line, Germany spent more money to get a worse result. France spent less money to get energy independence, economic advantage, and geopolitical leverage. If you found this valuable, subscribe. More deep dives coming. Share. Send this to anyone who thinks nuclear is scary. Comment, should your country follow France or Germany? Remember, energy policy isn't about ideology. It's about physics, economics, and having the courage to ignore the mob when the mob is wrong. France had that courage. The world is better for it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.